7 months after my husband passed away, I hired a contractor to check a water leak in his study. But as soon as I walked through the door, welcome to my new story. Merrick, the man I had hired 6 days earlier, was standing there with a look that did not belong to a plumber or a carpenter. He said, "Ashley, I need you to come back to the house right now. I found something behind the wall in his study. And I think you should come alone." My heart did not race. It stilled. This was not a leak. It was an opening. Drop a comment and let me know where you are listening from and what time it is for you right now. I would love to know who is part of our community. Also, have you ever felt like someone you loved was trying to tell you something from the other side? I drove the 11 minutes back to our home in Oak Brook in a silence so thick it felt structural. I did not speed. I did not panic. I just watched the road with a clinical focus. When I walked into Justin's study, the room still carried that faint, lingering ghost of sandalwood and expensive sawdust. It was a room I had kept closed for 210 days, like a condemned building I was not authorized to enter. Mark was standing by the built-in oak bookshelves, his heavy tool belt sagging. He had pulled back a section of the refined paneling work Justin had done himself with a precision that bordered on the obsessive. There, bolted directly into the load-bearing studs of the house, was a gray steel lockbox. It was about the size of a microwave, industrial, immovable, and entirely deliberate. Merrick looked at me, then at the box, and then at the floor. He told me he had found a prepaid structural inspection notice in his office files, dated weeks before Justin's heart simply stopped. Justin had not just predicted a leak. He had engineered a reason for a professional to tear into this specific wall. He had built a dead man's switch into the very bones of our house. I knelt on the floor, my knees hit the polished hardwood with a sharp, clinical click. I did not ask Merrick for help. I did not even look at him. I unlatched the box. The mechanism was smooth, well-oiled, and completely silent. Inside, I did not find old letters, dried flowers, or any of the sentimental trinkets people usually hide. I found stacks of cash, banded, clean, and undeniable. I counted it later, but I knew the weight of it immediately. $86,400. Underneath the currency lay a single sheet of heavy vellum with Justin's signature architectural handwriting, sharp, slanted, and perfectly aligned. The note was brief, stripped of any husbandly warmth, as if he knew that by the time I read it, I would need a commander, not a ghost. It said, "Do not trust Amanda. Find Blueprint Aoni 101. The note added, "Emergency liquidity, documented and taxed, but hidden from the company's reach. This is for you, not the creditors." I felt a strange, cold clarity wash over me. For 7 months, I'd been living in a fog of grief, a landscape without landmarks. I had been the grieving widow, the landscape architect who could not even look at her own garden. But looking at that cash and that warning, the fog evaporated. This was not a tragedy anymore. This was not a mourning period. This was a site plan, and I was finally looking at the raw topography of my life. I looked up at Merrick. He looked uncomfortable, caught between the gravity of a secret and the simplicity of a paycheck. I did not wait for him to speak. I reached into my bag and pulled out $500 from my own emergency stash. I handed it to him as a down payment for his discretion. I told him, there will be a much larger bonus and a contract for the entire house renovation if this wall stays sealed in your memory. Merrick took the money, his rough fingers brushing against mine. He nodded once, a silent contract between two people who understood that some things are meant to be buried until the right person has the shovel. He went to work, and I sat there on the floor, watching the oak paneling slide back into place, feeling the first spark of life I had had since the funeral. Anger was not loud this time. It was clinical. It was an accounting. Justin had not left me alone in a crumbling house. He had left me the blueprints for a demolition. I spread the bank statements across the mahogany island in the kitchen, not the $86,400 in cash from the wall, but the paper trail Justin had meticulously left behind. I looked at the numbers and did not see currency. I saw the architecture of a betrayal that had been years in the making. People like to think a marriage is built on a foundation of shared dreams. But in the cold light of this kitchen, I realized mine had been a business transaction where I was the only one providing the capital. 3 years ago, when our custom millwork studio was bleeding out because Brandon was too busy networking at $30,000 a year golf clubs, I was the one who signed over my $300,000 inheritance to keep the lights on. I did not do it for the company. I did it for Justin's passion. I was a silent investor in their version of a family, footing the bill while Brandon played the role of the charismatic visionary. Looking at the ledgers now, I realized my compassion was not a gift. It was a resource they had been overdrafting for years. This was not a partnership. It was a subscription, and I was the one whose credit card was being charged every single month while the service was being provided to someone else. I used to find Justin's habits exhausting. It was a running joke in our social circle. He did not just file a receipt. He meta-tagged it. He spent his Saturday mornings with a thermal label maker, marking everything from the circuit breakers in the basement to the spice jars in the pantry. He had even installed specialized software on our business server that attached GPS metadata to every digital invoice we sent. I used to tease him, calling it a clinical obsession, a way to control a world that felt too chaotic for his architectural mind. But as I began to cross-reference the bank transfers with those digital tags, the fog of the last 7 months did not just lift, it shattered. His meticulousness was not a psychological quirk. It was a weaponized version of the mundane. He was not just being organized, he was building a digital fortress, brick by brick, label by label. He knew Brandon's charisma was a mask for a structural flaw, and he spent his final years documenting that decay with the precision of a master builder. He had tagged the fraud. He had geolocated the theft. Anger was not loud this time. It was clinical. I rubbed my eyes, trying to summon a single tear of regret for the friendship I thought I had with Brandon and his wife, but there was only clarity. I had been a landscape architect for a decade. I knew how to read the terrain. I knew that before you can build anything lasting, you have to clear the rot and level the ground. This was not a breakdown, it was a balance sheet. And for the first time in 7 months, the numbers were starting to add up in my favor. I was not just a widow in a big, empty house in Oak Brook anymore. I was a majority shareholder who had just found the blueprints to her own survival. The air in the bistro was thick with the scent of expensive roasted beans and the cloying floral perfume Amanda had worn since college. She was sitting across from me, her eyes expertly widened in a practiced expression of gentle concern. She reached across the marble tabletop to pat my hand, her voice a soft, sympathetic coo. She was playing the role of the devoted best friend to the grieving widow, a performance she had been perfecting for 7 months. But, as she moved her arm, the light from the large windows caught the gold of a new Cartier love bracelet on her wrist. I did not see jewelry. I saw a line item on a ledger. That bracelet cost $6,900. I knew Brandon's official salary to the penny, and I knew their mortgage in Oak Brook was drowning in interest. The math did not add up for her to be wearing $7,000 of gold unless she was wearing a piece of the money Justin and I had bled for. My compassion for her had not just been a luxury. It had been a blind spot they had exploited until it was raw. You know, Ashley, Amanda said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, Brandon is so worried about you. He says the company is struggling with these strategic advisory fees that Justin left behind. It is such a mess, honey. Maybe it is time to just let it go. I froze, but my face remained a mask of clinical neutrality. Strategic advisory fees. That was the exact term Justin used to mock Brandon for using. Justin used to say Brandon used big words to hide small ideas. Hearing that specific phrase come out of Amanda's mouth was the smoking gun. It meant they were not just stealing the money. They were sitting at their dinner table, laughing at Justin's meticulousness while they planned how to carve up the remains of his life. Just then, my phone buzzed on the table. It was a text from Brandon. I did not even have to open it to know the timing was coordinated. He was offering me $250,000 for my entire half of the company. The message was blunt, stripped of the brotherly tone he usually used. He claimed the company was underwater and that if I did not sign by the end of the week, the debt would become my personal liability. He was trying to use my grief as a lever to pry away the only asset I had left. I looked back at Amanda. She was still smiling, that soft, poisonous smile, waiting for me to break. But the only thing breaking was the illusion that these people were human. In the world of architecture, when a foundation is cracked, you do not try to patch it with kind words. You condemn the building. Is everything okay? Amanda asked, her eyes darting to my phone. I did not answer. I did not cry. I did not explain the fire that was beginning to burn behind my ribs. I simply picked up my phone, tucked it into my bag, and stood up. I looked at her Cartier bracelet one last time and thought about the $86,400 sitting in the wall of my house. This was not a conversation anymore. This was a hostile takeover. Sarah and I sat in the study for 4 hours, the blue light of the laptop screen reflecting off her glasses. Sarah was a forensic accountant with a personality like a surgical scalpel, precise, cold, and entirely uninterested in the emotional debris of my life. She had tried every conventional combination we could think of. Birthdays, wedding anniversaries, even the name of Justin's childhood dog. Each attempt was met with the same blinking, red text, access denied. I walked over to the window, looking out at the Oak Brook hardwoods. I thought about the way Justin used to sketch. He did not just draw buildings. He obsessed over the mathematical harmony of space. He used to say that most people build with wood and nails, but the great ones build with the golden ratio. I turned back to the desk. Justin did not think in dates or names. He thought in constants. He thought in the eternal rules of structural integrity. I sat down and reached for the keyboard. I typed in capital letters, PHI, followed by an underscore, then the numbers 1.618, the golden ratio, the perfect proportion. The red text vanished. A progress bar flashed across the screen for 3 seconds, and then the vault opened. Sarah leaned in, her clinical detachment momentarily broken by a sharp intake of breath. The drive was organized into folders labeled with architectural codes. Folder AON 101 was the first thing I clicked. Inside were 38 separate documents, all of them invoices from Amanda Consulting Limited Liability Company. Each one was for a staggering amount, $10,000, $12,000, $15,000, all of them signed by Brandon. But it was the subfolder titled Warehouse Security that delivered the final blow. I clicked the first video file. It was a grainy shot of the woodshop warehouse, time-stamped 2 months before Justin died. In the video, Brandon was standing at Justin's desk. He was holding a stack of legal documents. I watched as he pulled a specialized light box from his drawer, placed one of Justin's signed letters underneath a blank contract, and began to meticulously trace the signature. He did it twice, checking his work with a flashlight, a small, triumphant smirk on his face. He was forging the very documents he was now using to try and bankrupt me. He was a parasite who had been practicing his craft in the shadows of the company my husband built. Sarah started downloading the metadata, confirming the geotags Justin had hidden in the files. "This is not just a business dispute anymore," Sarah said, her voice dropping to a low, lethal hum. "This is a digital confession. He has been building his own gallows for 3 years, and Justin just handed you the rope." Sarah opened a directory buried 3 layers deep in the encrypted partition. It was titled Project Anchor. I watched as she pulled up a high-resolution scan of a legal document I had never seen before. It was a personal guarantee for a $1.2 million business loan, dated 4 days after Justin's funeral. My breath hitched, but not out of fear. It was the sound of a structural failure. I looked at the bottom of the page, where the borrower's signature should be. There it was, my name, written in a flowing, confident hand that looked exactly like mine. Right down to the slight tilt of the letter, Sarah pointed to a small, embossed seal at the bottom of the page. Brandon hadn't just forged my name. He'd used a corrupt mobile notary, a man who'd certify a ghost signature for the right price to swear I was present in an office while I was actually standing over a grave. But I had not signed anything 4 days after the funeral. Those 4 days had been a blur of heavy curtains, cold tea, and a silence that felt like it was pressing on my chest. I had not even been able to sign a thank you card, let alone a 7-figure bank document. "He did not just skim the profits, Ashley," Sarah said, her voice dropping into a clinical professional register. "He used your credit and your equity in this house as collateral for a private expansion loan. He took out $1.2 million to fund his lifestyle, while the company was supposedly underwater. This is how he bought that mansion. This is why Amanda is wearing a $7,000 bracelet while you are worrying about a water leak." I stared at the screen, at the forgery of my own identity. This was a systematic execution of my future. If the company collapsed, which Brandon was actively trying to make happen by forcing me into a poverty sale, the bank would not go after him. They would come for me. They would take the house Justin built. They would take my savings. They would leave me with nothing but the debt of a dead man and the shame of a woman who had been too emotional to notice she was being robbed. The anger was not a fire. It was a cold, efficient engine. I thought about Brandon sitting in his luxury vehicle, rehearsing his next concerned speech to me. I thought about him and Amanda at their dinner table, looking at the forged papers and laughing at how easy it was to manipulate a grieving widow. They had not just stolen money, they had tried to steal my agency. Brandon walked into the conference room on the 42nd floor of the Chicago skyscraper like he was arriving at a victory party. He smelled of sea salt, cologne, and unearned confidence. He sat down, leaned back, and placed a gold pen on the table. He said, "Ashley, let us just put this tragedy behind us. Sign the buyout, take the $250,000, and go find some peace. I did not reach for his pen. I did not even acknowledge his voice. I simply slid a thick, white folder across the polished mahogany table. Inside were 38 fraudulent invoices, each one documented, timestamped, and geotagged. I watched his smile falter as he turned the first page. By the 10th page, the tan on his face had turned a sickly, translucent gray. Then, I turned my laptop around. I pressed play. The room was silent, except for the sound of Brandon's own recorded breathing as he sat at my husband's desk, meticulously tracing my signature onto $1 million liability. I watched him watch himself commit a federal crime. "You thought I was just a landscape architect, Brandon," I said, my voice as steady as a plumb line. "You thought I only understood dirt and drainage. You forgot that my entire job is reading a site's foundation. I know how to spot a structural failure before the first brick is even laid. And your foundation? It has been rotting for 3 years." I pushed 2 documents toward him. The first was a full restitution agreement for $347,216, plus an immediate and full discharge of the fraudulent $1.2 million loan you took out against my house. The second was a total surrender of his shares in the company, plus a buyout of my half at the fair market value of $820,000. You have until the end of this meeting to sign. My lawyer is already holding the send button on an email to the district attorney. If you walk out that door without signing, the FBI will be at your mansion before you reach your driveway. On the 11th second, my lawyer hits send on an email to the district attorney. That email contains every video, every forged invoice, and every digital tag Justin left behind. Your house, your car, your wife's Cartier bracelets, they are all collateral for a debt you cannot pay from a prison cell. Brandon looked at his lawyer, a man who was suddenly very interested in the view of Lake Michigan. His lawyer leaned in, whispered 2 words into Brandon's ear, "It's over," and then pulled his chair back, distancing himself from the wreckage. He looked back at me, his eyes darting like a trapped animal. He picked up the pen. His hand shook so violently the gold cap rattled against the table. He signed. He did not look at me. He could not. He was a man who had built a cage for me and accidentally locked himself inside. 53 days. That is how long it took for the last of the wire transfers to clear and the legal dust to settle. I stood in the bank parking lot and checked my phone. The numbers were all there, $820,000 for the buyout, plus the $347,216 in restitution. I did not cheer. I did not even smile. I just breathed in the cold, crisp Illinois air and felt the fog finally, permanently dissipate. I went straight to the office and changed the sign. It is Justin and Ashley's legacy millwork now. A partnership of equals, finally. I spent the afternoon in the study. It is different now. I repainted the walls a soft, light-reflecting cream and threw open the heavy velvet curtains Justin used to keep drawn. The sun poured across the hardwood, highlighting the spot where Merrick had found the box. Linda, Justin's mother, sat across from me in the new reading chair. We did not talk about the fraud or the vehicle Brandon had to sell or the way Amanda's social circle had evaporated overnight. We talked about Justin. We talked about his laugh and his thermal label maker and his stubborn, beautiful obsession with doing things the right way. I have come to realize that integrity is like a load-bearing wall in a house. You do not walk into a room and marvel at the structural studs. You do not compliment the way the beams hold up the roof. You just assume it is there. You take it for granted until someone tries to tear it down. That is when you realize the whole structure depends on it. If you find yourself in a similar situation, remember that your silence is not your weakness. It is your staging area. Do not ever mistake a person's quietness for ignorance. Sometimes, the person who says the least is the one who is paying the most attention. They are not just watching. They are documenting. They are not just waiting. They are drafting the blueprints to move you out of the house they built. Forgiveness is not always for the other person. Sometimes, it is just the final signature on a contract that sets you free. If this story reminded you that your value is non-negotiable, hit that share button. Let us make sure every predator knows that the quiet ones are usually the ones you should fear the most. Subscribe for more stories of justice and resilience.